Welcome to the Africa iShare YouTube channel. We welcome discussion and share any comments that you may have. If you're a tax practitioner within Africa, please consider joining the Africa iShare Tax Network. It helps us come up with panelists for future discussions and to keep the conversations ongoing after our discussions are done here. Welcome to the discussion for this week. Thank you.
So basically for today, we'll be talking about the digital sector. And the digital sector in this space refers to the micro, small, medium, and unregistered businesses within the African continent that are basically trying to make ends meet by making or rather conducting online trade. I think we have seen this happening in a lot of instances. We've seen people trying to sell clothes online. People sell wares through Facebook or any other platforms that people have sort of come up with for the purpose of similar activities. So the potential of this type of the informal sector in Africa is touted as the next front of the revolution, for lack of a better word, business revolution in Africa. And I believe even MasterCard Foundation has in the past noted that technology offers scale and has the potential to accelerate regional and international informal trade. Innovation solutions offer potential opportunities even in the rural areas. And if you look at it from even an African perspective, what we have seen is that most businesses that have become innovative to the extent of doing something ordinary in a digital way, or rather with a tweak of the digital aspect, we have seen it overtake to a very, very large extent the traditional businesses that are used to doing business in the normal, quote-unquote, way. So basically, to navigate us through this conversation today, we have Maxwell from PwC Ghana. We have Christine, who is an advocate of the High Court of Kenya and a tax practitioner from Kenya. And we have David, who is also a tax advisor from Nigeria. So quickly, what I would want to do is just to give the panelists time to quickly introduce themselves. And as you introduce yourself, be kind enough to also speak to your specialization in the space of tax. What is your specific area of interest, or what are your strengths in the wider scope of taxation? Then we could proceed with the conversation from that point. I will call upon Maxwell, if you can hear me.
Okay, so as was said, my name is Maxwell. I've been working with PwC Ghana since 2007. I'm currently a senior manager in the tax practice. Basically, in Ghana, we try to do almost everything. So we do almost all the type of taxation. So I have a fair understanding of almost everything that we do, direct, indirect tax. As we progress along the journey, I am now finding special interest in indirect taxation. So that is where I am currently focusing on. But of course, because of my background having to do corporate income tax, personal income tax, I'll be able to speak to almost everything in that regard. Sometime in 2011, 2013, I had an international experience in the PwC office in London. That's also something. But at that time, as I indicated, because we do almost everything, I did personal income taxation assignee services when I went to London office. So I will still be able to speak also about personal income taxes indirect, but at the moment I'm specializing in indirect taxation. Yes, so I have worked across the industries, oil and gas, safes, manufacturing. So I think maybe that will be it for now. In terms of my intro, I would add on if there is any need for further clarification.
That is quite a rich there, Maxwell, and I believe your experience will be quite important to contribution towards this particular discussion for today. Next, I would like to introduce Christine Mwaja. So, Christine, maybe you could just give a brief of yourself and your area of specialization.
My name is Christine Mwaja. I'm a tax practitioner and an advocate of the High Court of Kenya. I have 8 years of tax experience working for various at various places in Kenya. I've worked for Deloitte East Africa, Denton, Hamilton, Harrison and Matthews, and a couple of other places. I have quite extensive knowledge on any matter taxation in Kenya. I have a bit of working knowledge of South Africa tax because I specialized in that in doing my master's in tax and commercial law. Yes, and I'm currently trying to understand and figure out Chinese tax. Yes, so that's my area of expertise. Thank you.
Definitely, Chinese tax is the way to go if you want to excel in the taxation practice, especially from an African perspective. As we can all see, they're getting a lot of businesses from the African government. So I believe anyone who can unlock that kind of space would be a very successful tax practitioner. So thanks, Christine, for that introduction. So our next panelist is David. So David.
Okay, hello everybody. Good evening. My name is David Apaflo, and I'm a tax consultant. I have a background in accounting. I'm a chartered accountant, and I have over 10 years experience in tax issues. My specialization is revenue recovery for government. So I've had experience consulting for national government and subnational governments in Nigeria, and pretty much across all industries. So, I'm really looking forward to this conversation because I can bring to the conversation a mix in terms of, more like the public sector angle and the government angle, being an advisor to the government, and also having clients that are also in the private sector to be able to give a balanced perspective.
All right, David. Thank you for that introduction, and I mean it's always very very insightful if you can also get an appreciation of both the public and the private sector look at matters taxation. So quickly, I would like us to jog our minds around the issue on digital taxation. So I just want to shoot this question probably directly to David. David, from your observation, or in your experience, especially from a Nigerian perspective, how popular is the use of social media and other forms of digital platforms in your country, especially from a marketing perspective?
Okay, social media is huge in Nigeria. It's really, really huge. In fact, right now, there's a huge, social campaign on social media, majorly on Twitter and Instagram. You might have seen it is the End SARS campaign against police brutality. And that is a campaign that, has been pushed basically social media, because traditional media outlets weren't carrying the story. And beyond that particular issue, during the lockdown, we had a situation where a lot of information was being disseminated via social media platforms. On the commercial side, a lot of trade happens via social media. A lot of people sell items on Twitter, via Instagram. So it's actually a very active and vibrant space in Nigeria.
So maybe while we're still on it, so have you seen circumstances whereby maybe people try to sell their goods through social media, and maybe a shift from the traditional way of doing business more into a digital way of maybe marketing or trying to do deliveries or things like that? And maybe you could just speak to that and maybe the rate of uptake in Nigeria, because for one thing, we know Nigerians are properly tech savvy, and Nigerians grab opportunities as they come. So maybe you could also speak to that.
Okay, so in terms of the uptake, Nigeria really has quite decent mobile density, and so it means a lot of people are online. Nigeria also has a very youthful population, And we know that social media and youth go hand in hand. So you actually have a lot of people online. And then wherever people are, there will always be trade. And so you have this platform where people congregate. There's trade going on there. So you have pages that, sell hair, for example, or sell makeup, clothes, shoes, bags. A lot of trade actually goes on, on the social media space, meals, gift vouchers, all types of things on social media platforms. So the uptake is pretty high in Nigeria, especially in the very urban areas, Abuja, Lagos, Port Harcourt. Pretty decent. I'll say there's a lot of activity happening in that space in Nigeria.
That is very encouraging. So maybe closer home, Maxwell. How would you speak to the social media uptake and also in Ghana, and also how maybe Ghanaians are trying to take advantage of maybe providing services from a digital perspective?
Okay, so in Ghana, the current population is around 30 million, and it is estimated that um, about 20 million of the population use mobile phones. In terms of internet usage, estimated about 10 million using internet. And then when it gets to social media, in that case, you're referring to the likes of the Facebook, Instagram, the Twitters, we are looking at around 5.6 million. And so basically, you can say that there is really a lot of usage of social media in Ghana. Looking at the population and putting it in context as an African nation in that regard. If you look at it from the business perspective, there's a lot of trade going on social media. One of the oldest I could remember is a platform where people could. I would say that there's been that embrace of social media in Ghana, and we do see a lot of companies also trying to promote their goods or services on social media as well. So I would say Ghana, to a large extent, there is that active market. So this topic is also very, very good. The fact that we are trying to look at how social media marketing and then in terms of the taxation of it, it is actually a very, very good topic.
Thanks, Maxwell, for that. Quickly, Christine, I think I'll give this opportunity to you. Maybe you could talk to the issue around the use of social media in Kenya from an basically how well it has been taken up, and maybe the adoption of digital platforms for business purposes. And as you give your comments on that, we'd also like to briefly talk about any tax regimes that you're aware of from the Kenyan space, what the Kenyan government is doing basically around trying to raise revenue from these digital platforms.
Okay, thanks for that. And as far as use of social media in Kenya is concerned, it's quite big because in a population of just around 53 million, the internet usage is at 43%. And social media alone, the users of social media who are active on a daily basis is over 10 million users. So it's quite big, and by social media, that's like the mainstream social media like Facebook, which is taking around 40% of the users, then Twitter, YouTube, Instagram. And when you include something like WhatsApp, the number goes even much higher. So it's quite, the usage of social media in Kenya is quite extensive. And when it comes to marketing on social media, if for instance, if you go on Twitter, then a lot of companies are promoting themselves. Kenyan companies are promoting themselves, their products and their services on Twitter. For instance, you will not go past a couple of posts without seeing either an insurance company or a telecommunication company or just any service provider or someone selling their goods. But something that is notable is that especially like on Twitter, you'll find like it's mainly the big or the more bigger companies that you find promoting themselves on Twitter a lot. So much so that I think you'll find a company like one of the telecommunication big companies in Kenya called Safaricom. They are, I mean, I don't think they ever take down their ads on Twitter. But then on Facebook, you'll find Facebook has more users, and you find like someone even with without promoting themselves paying any cost, like on Facebook you just have a page where you're selling your clothes or selling or advertising your services, and the services advertised there range from anything from a property agents to selling of products to just about anyone who can advertise on Facebook. So there's both paid a lot of use of paid promotions and also the free promotion you get from just posting on Facebook. When it comes to like what the government is doing on the tax regimes, I will start by speaking to the recent tax that was introduced, which is the digital service tax. It's quite impressive if you ask me how the government is trying to implement that, because so initially in 2019, that's when the talk of like bringing a tax called taxing the digital marketplace was introduced, and then through 2020 in the change in the law in the Finance Act, that's when the digital service tax was well put in there, which is supposed to be charged at 1.5% of the gross transaction value. And I think the dicey part about taxing the digital economy is always like what kind of service, what service are you going, how are you going to, which, when you say you charge a digital service tax, what kind of services are you aiming for, and how are you going to make sure that you capture them? And so the regulations were issued recently by the cabinet secretary for finance, setting out, like, for instance, the services that they're trying to target through the digital service tax. I think they are quite, I think they are quite well thought out. And so, like, this digital service tax will target any downloads of music, of movies, of online games. They will target, so whenever you download that and you're making a payment for that, and you are appointed as an agent to be able to withhold that, to collect the tax, then you should withhold 1.5% of the gross transaction value and pay that to the government. And anyone, like, and then also subscription, if you're subscribing maybe to LexisNexis, for instance, or Forbes, or like an online market where you're getting news and that kind of thing, or maybe you're subscribing to get data on the financial markets in the world. You also, as you're paying for that, you should deduct that tax. And then, like, things like sale of tickets online, or online teaching, or someone offering e-courses, or if you're selling data, like how Google gathers data analytics, and you're paying Google to give you the analytics data, there's tax on that. Of course, there's some things which I think remain problematic for the digital economy, just not just for Kenya, but for anyone. And that's things like, how do you ensure, how do I know who is a user, who is using this? How do I determine that the movie that has been downloaded from Kenya, and therefore this person should be paying? How do I tell the person who is using, for instance, Netflix is in Kenya, and the regulations try to do that, and say that if the phone or the computer or the laptop that you use is in Kenya, then you're a user in Kenya. Or if the IP address that you used is in Kenya, then it's in Kenya, like the person is located in Kenya. Or if you're making a payment using a debit or credit card which is issued by a financial institution in Kenya, then that seems to be someone in Kenya. So it's quite, I think, or if your business is set up in Kenya, or you have a residential address in Kenya, then any payment you're making on that, you are a user in Kenya. So it's also VAT would apply for these people who are making supplies through the digital marketplace. So, but it's quite some thought has been put into it, but of course it's not being the digital economy. I don't think every possible thing has been captured. Like for instance, if someone were to pay using in future through a cryptocurrency and they don't pay using a financial institution credit or debit card, how do you capture such payments? Or there's quite still a bit that's missing, but I think, and especially on the VAT, how these people who are offering services through a digital marketplace, and a digital marketplace they're saying is that is a place where buyers and sellers are able to meet online. So for instance, if like Facebook would be required to register for VAT, and I think it's quite nice that there's a simplified registration regime that has been introduced in the regulations. But still, I think quite a lot can be said on whether that is working, whether it's likely to work. They're quite dicey, I think. That's it.
Christine, I think that's a very interesting perspective you've given from a Kenyan perspective. So maybe just before you go, I would have wanted you to give us another quick perspective into this issue of influencers.
Mhm.
We've seen the upsurge of the people we call social media influencers, who maybe are paid by entities or by persons to move an agenda or to market or to do whatever it is, promotions and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Are you aware of any measures that the government has put in place to try and maybe tax such activities or such persons?
That's quite interesting because I think social media influencers are like a big deal because when you look at it, right now people are making quite good amount of money by just being, having a million followers on Twitter, for instance, because someone will pay you to just mention their products or their service and advertise it for them. So it's quite interesting because now, in Kenya there's a promotional there's a tax for making payments for advertising, marketing, and promotional services, that kind. But the thing about that, which is about influencers, I'm not sure how. I don't know how much that the promotional tax would be able to target them, especially because you can give someone your product, products of value that then they advertise for you, or sometimes it's just that you give something back to them which may not be valued as well. So I think a bit of thought needs to be done on that, on social media influencer marketing, and also especially the fact that these social media marketing influencers could be anyone. Like, how do you track, unless you say that everyone who reaches Twitter followers of maybe 100,000, then this person needs to be taxed. But I think quite a bit of thought would need to be put into that. But I think there's potential for someone to make quite a lot of money by just being an influencer on social media right now, and it's actually working. Yeah, but that's the situation in Kenya.
Thanks, Christine, for that insight. So maybe off the top of my mind, I was thinking about this from a moral perspective, because I think it is just morally fair for everyone to pay their fair share of taxes. So whereby maybe especially in the cases of the so-called influencers, I believe it is not very easy for the government to track some of the incomes that probably they could make from such channels. Say for, let's say, in cases whereby withholding tax is applied on such incomes by let's say the companies that have sort of engaged them, then that way there could be a way of tracking down that payment. But to the extent that there's no withholding tax mechanism that has been put in place that can tie whatever is remitted to the government in advance to whatever these persons earned, I think it just boils down to the moral aspect of us taxpayers. But obviously we are going to look at that maybe at a later stage in the conversation. So to David. Could you maybe briefly speak of the tax regimes that the government is trying to put in place in Nigeria towards maybe trying to bring all the digital services under the tax bracket?
Okay, so in Nigeria, what we have seen is not really a new type of tax for the digital service sector. So the Finance Act of 2019, which was just signed and came into law in February this year, came up with something called the significant economic presence. But that is more for foreign companies operating digitally in Nigeria. But within the context of the informal sector that we're talking about, a lot of these people are already within, the ambit of Nigerian tax. So Nigerian tax is based on where your income is accrued from, ending, or whether it's brought into Nigeria. So a lot of these informal sector people already earn their revenue in Nigeria. A few people might earn their revenue from outside sources, because these days we have platforms like the Flutterwave store that allows you to sell, to people across Africa. So you can have a person who publishes a book and he can sell to anybody in Kenya, South Africa, Botswana, anywhere. But predominantly, a lot of the revenues, are earned in Nigeria. And so the Nigerian government really hasn't come up with, a different type of tax for the digital services sector. In fact, I actually do not think we need a different type of tax for that sector. We already have a value-added tax, and the real issue is that transacting businesses on a digital service platform is not really, it's a platform, right? So the substance of your business is still there. And so if you're offering advertising services, for example, it's just simply another platform on which you can do it offline on billboards, or you can do it on social media with an Instagram page, for example. And so the substance of the transaction is advertising services. And if advertising services already will suffer a value-added tax, there's actually no need for another tax because it's being delivered online. But the real challenge I see with, operating online is actually the evasiveness of these taxpayers. How exactly do you identify them? How exactly do you ensure that you're bringing them into the tax net, right? And as Christine had mentioned earlier, if you can decide you want to even, tax these people when they're making payments with your regular payment processors in country. But what if somebody's making a payment with a cryptocurrency wallet? And then that starts to, create a bit more complexity. But the real issue, I think, we even have in Nigeria is accounting for these taxpayers. So the SME sector, contributes about 48% to the Nigerian GDP. And the real issue is how many of these people are registered for taxation. And so I feel like there are other priorities than adding a new tax. Let's, enumerate the taxpayers we have. Let's bring them into the tax net, and then we can begin to, then even collect what we should collect, first of all, before we start introducing new taxes. But social media is really big in Nigeria. You have, blogs like Instablog, you have Toke Makinwa, who's an influencer, you have somebody like Tomike. These people have millions of followers, and they have sponsored posts. You can, as a company, as a brand, if you want to get exposure with your clients, you can take up, a sponsored post with these people, and you get thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people showing interest and going on to buy your service or your product. So it's a really huge space. In Nigeria, there's no separate digital service tax. What we just have is a value-added tax of 7.5%, which would apply to transactions that are vatable.
A very interesting perspective from Nigeria. So what you're speaking to just takes us back to the old question that most of the revenue authorities in Africa are trying to grapple with. How do you ensure everyone is brought under the tax net, and just how do you ensure that everyone pays their fair share of taxes? And obviously with the informal sector, it becomes a bit difficult because of the informal nature of the businesses. And obviously, I think as tax continues to evolve, then maybe the African revenue authorities will be in a position to maybe to deal with that issue step by step. So Maxwell, on to Ghana. So maybe you could you talk to the measures that the Ghanaian government has put in place?
Yeah, so just as David said, we can look at it from the point of view of the local entities or the players, and then we can also look at it from the point of view of foreign entities. So if you typically pick the local entities or the local players, then yes, you are looking at, let's say, business in Ghana that advertises or trades their goods or services online. So let's say on Facebook or Twitter, Instagram, or any other place. So for these local players, the ideal thing is such that the laws in Ghana should be able to deal with their taxation because they are already present in Ghana and they should ordinarily be registered and then they should be paying taxes, either it is corporate income tax or if it is VAT that should apply on their services. The challenge is that, as has been said previously, is that there is that issue of being able to track effectively all entities that are supposed to be registered to ensure that they actually account for their taxes. So there is that challenge for the tax authority to be able to monitor effectively and to bring everyone into the tax net. So you are likely to find a lot of businesses with presence online and making a lot of income not have actually been registered with the tax authority. So that is one sad issue when it comes to Ghana. But in terms of the laws, it is so clear for the local players. We can flip it over and then look at it from the foreign players or the non-residents. And the point is just as Christian has said, it is challenging to actually track and monitor. So if you look at our laws from the corporate income tax perspective, we have not clearly outlined any such law to address these foreign or let's say non-resident players in the space. The closest will be to look at whether or not they have established a PE in Ghana, permanent establishment in Ghana. But then you would realize that for most of these players, if you go through the PE laws or the steps, they are not likely to trigger the creation of a PE in Ghana, and so they may escape that tax bracket in terms of the corporate income taxation. There's also where there is a double taxation agreement, for instance, between Ghana and other foreign country, which when you look at the provisions of the double taxation agreement, you may also come to terms with the fact that you may not be able to easily arrest or bring some of these foreign or non-resident players into the Ghanaian tax net. So the corporate income tax side is sort of tricky, and I think that if there's supposed to be any regulation, that probably could be one of the focuses. But when it comes to the indirect tax or the VAT, there is a clear provision in the VAT Act that talks about a non-resident person who provides e-commerce in Ghana for which is used or enjoyed in Ghana, having to account for the VAT applicable on that service. So either that non-resident person or their agent will be required to account for the VAT on that service. So yes, for e-commerce and VAT, the laws are quite clear on that. Either the non-resident person or their agents in Ghana needs to account for VAT. The gap, from my point of view, comes in when we are looking at the corporate income tax point of view, where the PE rules do not strictly apply to them, and for that matter, they may actually get to escape in that front. I think the other part also has to do with the social media influencers. And yes, I will also agree largely to the comment that's have been made by Christine and David that yes, these any income that are earned by these kind of persons should be ordinarily be subject to tax. Of course, there are no specific regulations or rules in Ghana targeted at them at the moment. But of course, we can appeal to the general rules that do apply. as to the extent that if they are getting additional payment or additional gift of protein a particular or company, then yes, they should be subject to the taxes as appropriate. So basically, that is how we can look at it from the Ghanaian point of view. The fact that for VAT, yes, we could deal with any foreign or non-resident person operating within the digital space, but corporate income tax leaves us room. And then for the social media influencers, we are saying that ordinarily their income should be subject to tax, even though there are no particular provisions concerning them. We could find a place for them in the general tax regime and then subject whatever amount or income that they are earning to tax. The challenge, once again, is how do we track them? How do we get them? And our tax regime is not sophisticated enough to be able to track all of these down. So, unfortunately, a lot of revenue just passed down the drain, and the government is not able to raise or able to collect all these tax revenues that they should have ordinarily been able to collect.
Well, interesting perspective. So I wanted to quickly switch gears and maybe try and look at this issue from an Africa perspective. And this question I would want to shoot it to Christine first. So from an African landscape, taxation landscape perspective, what are your thoughts on generally the government trying to tax the informal sector?
Okay, I think that's quite an interesting subject. Personally, how to begin with, there's been quite some findings, especially by the International Center for Tax Development, and what they have been saying, especially on taxing of because OECD has been doing the work on the taxation of the digital economy, and now what has happened is that because, for instance, African countries have taken unilateral measures to start taxing this economy. So there has been pushback, especially by the international community, because they say that, especially like the US, like imposing tariffs on countries that are charging digital tax because they say that they are unfairly targeted at the US companies. But in any case, Europe, for instance, has been blacklisting African countries and other countries that are imposing unilateral measures in the digital economy. But I think comments that the international community is making, they might have a point that Facebook is being targeted. But you see, in any case, these businesses that are being done on these platforms make a significant part, take a significant part of the informal sector within, like for instance, in Kenya. So I think there's a disconnect in that conversation. First, that's the point I wanted to make. But also, in any case, I think taxing these informal businesses, first, the government hasn't figured. I don't think like the government of Kenya has figured out how they will tax someone who is selling, for instance, food on Facebook. Like trying to increase their market, maybe for a restaurant on Facebook. So they haven't figured that out yet because they will expect this person to declare their income as business income, which it is. But in any case, you see, just because someone is marketing it on Facebook does not make it any less of business income what they receive. It's just that they're using Facebook, for instance, to market themselves. So as regards taxing these businesses, I don't think the government are too successful in any case about it. But the war on how countries are going about taxing the digital economy is, I think, quite an issue. Quite an issue, especially for African countries. But I think also, like in the case of Kenya, if you look at, although people are using social media a lot, I don't think it's quite at an advanced level as I think other countries, especially Europe or US, people who are using the digital market space. I think the market in, like for instance, in Kenya is still quite young. And I think even if you compare it to other African countries. For instance, even Kenya compared to South Africa, you really can't compare how much digital space is being used in Kenya versus South Africa. South Africa is way ahead of how many people are using the digital space, the digital market. If I can give an example, for instance, if you wanted to buy like tickets to online tickets to a concert, or if you wanted to buy something of that sort in Kenya. I mean, let's say I want to go to the Kenya National Theatre to watch a play. In most cases, those tickets are not sold on our website. It's either they'll be sold at the door, or there'll be somewhere some sort of arrangement where they say you can get the tickets here. But compare that to South Africa, where like for most events, if you want to buy like a ticket, you go to Quicket and get like any sort of event, they're selling tickets there online. So if you look at even like the Kenyan market in that way, it's quite different when the focus is to tax like someone who is trying to sell in such a market. And on the other side, if you look at Kenya, like using mobile payments is greater than selling on social media, for instance. So if I'm going to like the Kenya National Theatre to watch a play, it's more likely that they will tell me to pay using mobile money, and that's the option that's available for me to pay, other than to get the tickets online on our website. So I think the government might be losing focus if their aim is to try and tax the digital economy, using like tax these informal businesses. I think there are better ways of taxing it. It's better possibly use the mobile in Kenya, at least the mobile payment system closer than trying to tax the digital marketplace by itself, because there's a lot that is not being used, and there's a lot that's lost when you try to tax on that. Yeah, that's what I would say about that.
Thanks, Christine, for that useful insight. So maybe the next question I would like to pose to probably David is from an African perspective, not just looking at Nigeria. What are your thoughts around the government trying to maximize on collection of revenue, even from the informal sectors versus how that revenue is used to grow the economy? In your view, do you see whether there's a match or a mismatch? Yes.
I think there's a mismatch, and it's not just a mismatch, it's a very big mismatch, right? So, in as much as we know that tax is paid quid pro quo, so without expecting anything in return, the fundamental part of paying tax in an organized society is that there is a social contract. So the government is expected to provide certain social services to its citizens. And across Africa, I can tell you that that gap is really, 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 really wide. And so if we're always focusing on taxation, then we forget that growth is more important, because it is when we grow, when we have income, when we have economic activity, that's when you're going to be able to maximize your tax revenue. So right now in Africa, we have a situation where there's a cost of legality, meaning that it costs me more to legalize my business, formalize my business, and come under the government's ambit than it is to hide as a mushroom business and keep hiding. And if I was a responsible government, what I would be looking at is to ensure that I meet my part of the social contract. We know paying taxes is not easy, but let people be a bit willing to pay these taxes themselves. Remember that a lot of the tax system relies on self-declaration. In a country like Nigeria that has over 200 people, how many people do you want to audit? So what you really want to do is you want to affect these people in a way that they feel a sense of commitment, they feel a sense of community, they feel a sense of identity and belonging to the country, that they are trying to chip in, their own little bit. And so I think, African governments need to focus more on growth, because this informal sector that you're looking at, together it's a large sum. So you might see a figure and think, oh, this informal sector is generating a large amount of money. But the number of people there is so much, because there's a lot of fragmentation. So by the time you look at these people on an individual level, they're not well off as individuals. And so I think governments need to take a renewed approach to these things. I'm tired of governments looking at sectors and the only thing they're thinking about is the potential government revenue. It should be about what is the likely potential for all the citizens. Government is just one stakeholder in an economy, and so we need to say what exactly will we need to do to make sure that this works for everybody. So I think we should focus more on growth. Let Africa grow. When Africa grows, we have a very large pie, and then we can begin to tax that pie.
Okay. Unfortunately, I think Clifford has dropped off from the call. So Maxwell, what about in Ghana? What could government do to promote the growth of the digital informal sector outside of tax policies? And just like what David has said, is there like a mismatch in what the governments are trying to do, trying to tax these digital economies, while at the same time wanting them to grow?
Okay, so I think I do share to some extent the position that David has actually brought forth. The fact that we do not necessarily need to lump all the players in the sector together to say there is this amount, but we need to look at it just beyond lumping the informal sector together. The other twist I would want to also say is if you're looking at Africa and you're looking at Ghana, if we want to effectively tax this informal economy, then there should be what I call the balance between trying to achieve development and trying to improve tax revenue. And so if you're a government, you need to have the balance in mind. In order to achieve development as an economic growth, you want to make sure that you provide the needed enabling environment, for instance, to enable such small businesses to be able to thrive. For instance, how easy is it to set up a business? How easy is it to register your business? And in terms of road network, how easy is it for somebody to easily connect from one place to the other? In terms of access to internet, how easy it is, because if you provide this basic infrastructure, automatically you have an impact on the businesses, and these small businesses will also benefit. So looking at the balance, one leg is looking at improving the economy or improving growth, and I am saying that one of the ways of looking at it is that provide the basic infrastructure to enable your businesses to thrive, and it's going to affect these small businesses. Then the other leg is how do you generate the needed tax revenue after you have provided some of this infrastructure? I would say that we can look at a targeted approach in terms of our taxation. Our taxation should not just be wholesale or lump sum. Everybody come and pay 25% just as it is in Ghana, but at least we should be able to scale it down. I know that there are incentives in our tax laws for those in manufacturing, those in mining, and then other sectors. There are incentives for them. But looking at these small businesses, how well can we get closer to them to provide, for instance, an incentive for a young graduate who is, for instance, into the sale of food or clothing, who just started? What are the incentives available? The closest we have is for young graduates who are below 35 years of age, having a 5-year tax holiday. So yes, it is possible, but of course, in Africa, some people may start later in life. So if somebody is 36 or they're 39, then they may not get that tax incentive. And so I would say in the tax side of things, we need to be more targeted, and we need to probably try to look at such businesses and then try to offer them more, because the focus has been more towards agro processing like agri and manufacturing. But these digital businesses are more of commerce or trade. So they actually buy and sell, and they want things that are quick and fast moving. So that is one space which I think that Ghana, or let's say in Africa in general, we have not probably done so well. We must be targeting more. Then the other point I want to raise is the fact that even with the targeting, there should be that boldness or the political will from our leaders. In circumstances, for instance, in Ghana, there's been waivers on on spare parts, for instance, and the whole idea was to make it affordable because we paid the applicable duties, and that impact did not trickle down to the ordinary Ghanaians. So sometimes there should be that boldness or that political will for government to be able to implement whatever policy that actually comes into play. So if you introduce such a policy and you want to encourage the dealers or the operators in that industry to be roped into the tax net, one of the things that government could have done was say that any spare parts dealer who want to benefit from this incentive should be registered. And in that case, you'll be able to rake in something. But unfortunately, that was not done. So sometimes the politics come into play and we design a very nice policy, but because of sometimes we try to not look at it holistically, we don't get the benefit. So I would say that we need to target particular industries, and then we should also have the political will to be able to implement whatever policies that we are actually proposing, so that it will have the desired effect. Otherwise, it might remain the same.
From the points that you made, for instance, on like giving an incentive, say like to graduates who are starting a business, it's very right what you say that the problem is that within Africa, someone, not just graduates, everyone might be struggling to start a business even in their 40s, you know. So this incentive, I think, would really need that each country looks inside itself to see what is actually needed, and then come up with a solution. To my mind, I thought, because especially for the digital tax, like let's say for instance, the Kenyan market, as you say, is like 10 million users of Facebook, for instance. Well, maybe the number is quite smaller for a smaller country like, let's say, Djibouti. So you might find that, or even in Nigeria, of course, the market is way much bigger than any other market, because even of the population than most other countries. So you find, like, for instance, if Facebook decided to close shop in one country because the market is not so big, because you're introducing a tax, then it means that they are able to do that because the market is not big for individual African countries. But if the entire market in Africa were to stand up against maybe not being able to tax these economies, then there might be a case for negotiating for better taxation of like especially the digital M&Es. But anyway, in any case, now I realize that African countries have such different, they are alike, but the differences also are big, quite significant. So, and especially when it comes to like who is using, what's the internet penetration like, is this infrastructure, has it been provided, just as Maxwell, as you said, like some countries are even struggling to get internet connectivity, leave alone taxing the digital economy. So I think it's quite a different landscape for each country when it comes to looking for solutions, and especially, and the informal sector, it's quite big. The informal sector within different African countries is really big for most countries, but in any case, how people are trying to grow the informal sector is also quite different. Like the case for Zimbabwe may not be the case for Kenya and Egypt. It's quite diverse. So I think we are on to, in case anyone has a question, anyone listening in, you can put it on the chat. But David, what, like, let's say we are rethinking tax in Africa. So what are your thoughts? Like, because, and even Maxwell just touched on it, African governments seem not to be able to provide basic public utilities like healthcare, roads, electricity, internet. So should citizens in African countries be picking more burdens for tax if the government is not providing what they should be providing?
Okay, so it's a catch-22 situation, really. So you can say the revenue is not enough. That's why there's no development, and then because there's no development, in turn the revenue is low. Truth of the matter is we have to decide to fix one of the problems, and I'd say that we need to have a more systematic way of implementing government programs. So right now, the current revenues that these governments are generating, how effective are the programs? How effective are the budgets? are they deployed to key areas that will generate multiplier effect, right? So you can decide to spend $1 in healthcare. What is the multiplier effect to the economy, to the people?
Mhm.
So we have a situation in Africa where a lot of governments focus on white elephant project, right? So they build things that absolutely do not have economic value, and they're usually very expensive. And so I think if we start to look at it to say, okay, we currently have some money, it's probably not enough, but how can we spend this money in a way that, would maximize our utility, our output? A country is not different from a human being. As a human being, if your salary is not enough, or if as a business, if your revenue is not enough, but you need to invest to get more yield, do better, you actually have to ask yourself, where is the most productive place for me to invest my capital? And that's exactly how governments need to start looking at it. Where is the most productive place to invest the revenues that we currently have so that our citizens will get the best value? And so I feel like in Africa, we should be focusing more on creating markets. When we create markets, a lot of people are able to come in and trade. So let's remove the barriers to trade, and which is one of the reasons why I really like the EFCFTA agreement. But even within these African countries, let's remove the barriers to trade, the government bottlenecks. Let's create infrastructure that will allow people to trade. And then when we trade, so because taxes will either be on income or on consumption, and when we're able to increase the volume of trade, then we would in turn have increased government revenues.
Okay, that's quite interesting. And so, because that's you're suggesting, like possibly look at what's the most productive areas to invest in. Where are you going to get a good return for your investment, and invest there on the taxes that the government is collecting. But David, also, what about the loss of revenue? I mean, like the taxes that's collected, and a big part of it is lost in corruption deals or in just bad. What about that?
There's that, but we also need to say one thing, right? Sometimes corruption is a function of non-productivity,
Mm.
right? If you find people, even in these advanced economies in US and China, there is corruption in these countries. There is a book that I read recently. It's about the prosperity paradox by Fosa and the late Professor Clay Christensen. We will see that economic development is not necessarily hampered because of corruption. In some of these established economies that we look up to, there's still corruption. But what really happens, what we really need to do is we need to create a system where it is easier for you to make money doing regular business than it is for you being corrupt. Because what we find is that a lot of times these corrupt practices are people basically trying to secure themselves. So, for example, somebody is stealing money to secure his health because there's no public health system.
Mhm.
So, by the time some of these things begin to work, you find out that the need and the propensity of people going into politics for self-aggrandizement will really reduce, because then what you find is that there's more prosperity. I would rather be a private businessman than going into politics, because I'll do better there, I'll make more money there, right? And so I think we need to begin to rethink it. Yes, I'm not saying corruption is not a problem, but let's increase our productivity. When we increase our productivity, some of these things will fall by the wayside. And I think so. If you take Nigeria, for example, over the last 5 years, we had a president who came in on the mandate of wiping out corruption in the country. What I can tell you with 5 years of data is that corruption cannot be the focus of the government, right? It is better you think of growing your economy. And so what we've seen over the last 5 years is that we've been focusing on corruption, we're focusing our eyes on the back. There's no eye looking towards the future to say, how do we grow the country, Nigeria? And so I think while corruption for us, let's keep growing our economy. Some of these things will fall by the wayside as we develop.
I really like the response right there. And I've remembered when you said the government of Nigeria came into office promising to fight corruption, which is, I think, the same narrative that the government of the current president of Tanzania also took up when he was getting into office, was to fight corruption. And I also agree that, especially to the extent that if you have good roads, if you have good medical care, and if you have good, like good electricity connectivity, it will possibly work, just in and of itself will work to fight some of the corrupt practices. But it's just that maybe the government needs to have a focus on both, not to actually look for development as much as it's fighting corruption. But in Ghana, what's the situation like? Maxwell, if you could speak about like the government being able to provide these basic utilities versus the tax collected, and what other ideas would you have on how to deal with that?
Okay, so again, our situation is not so different from Nigeria. There is that kind of perception about the government officials, and there are some grounds for that in some instances where certain cases do come up and you really do not see much action being taken, and so it is perceived that okay, government is not interested at trying to pursue this matter if the person or the persons involved are members of the ruling party. So there is that perception, and so deeply ingrained in that perception goes all the way down to even impact on the way that people freely or people genuinely would want to open up and then pay their taxes, because the average person will tell you that why should I pay X amount of tax for that government official to use to buy a house, to use to buy a car and drive, whilst I walk on the street, stand in the sun, and my roads are not fixed. I don't have water. I don't have electricity. Why should I pay tax? So there is usually that kind of cry from the citizenry to the government that look, we say we should pay X, but we are not seeing any work being done with it. So I think our situation is similar to that David has said. And until or unless American governments tackle corruption seriously, or at least the citizens begin to see signs of actions being taken, chances are that their interest in paying taxes might not be what should be, or it might not come at acceptable levels. So I would say that we should tackle this matter as soon as possible so that that perception of corruption is dealt with. I also trying to look at our behavior towards payment of taxes, and I know that generally nobody wants to pay taxes. Even Trump himself appears not to pay taxes. That is just an aside. So you will see that as a people we do not want to pay tax. So it's important that whatever amount that we are paying as taxes, we do see it's being used in that regard. Again, I will come to the issue of finding the balance, and I think David mentioned that yes, African governments should focus more on trying to improve on their countries in terms of provision of infrastructure, making it accessible for people to easily do business or trade. And once that revenue is generated from business, then normally or naturally it will trickle down into the tax net. So there is that need for African government to focus on trying to make their economies grow and expand, such that people or the citizens will be willing to pay the needed amount of tax. I would also want to touch on the part of education, that there is a need for government or officials or revenue authorities to also embark on education, tax education, because not many people, especially those in what we call the informal sector, really even understand that they have tax obligations. Some of them may not entirely be aware, and so much as people may have gone to school up to tertiary level, they may still not understand taxation that much. And so we need to step up and educate our people to be able to appreciate the fact that they need to fulfill their tax obligations. So I think those are what I'll add to what David has said. But I think generally, if we are able to tackle the issue of the perception of corruption of the government officials, and if people begin to feel the impact of whatever contribution that they are making, and they begin to see that the government cares or think about them, I think that it will, in a way, have an impact on how the people would be willing to pay the right amount of taxes. Yeah, thank you, Christian.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, I've remembered just from what you said, like a couple of weeks ago, is the customer service week where companies are appreciating people, their clients, and the Kenya Revenue Authority has been sending emails to people telling them we appreciate you. And someone responded to them and told them, I am not your client, I'm your hostage. So do not send me an email appreciating me. That you are holding me hostage. So
Wow.
I think that's that's a common feeling of taxpayers, and even if the Kenya Revenue Authority is increasingly sends you an email as a taxpayer and tells you you should attend a training where we will train you on how you should comply with tax. They're trying to do that in Kenya, and people are really not feeling very, appreciated as a client for the Kenya Revenue Authority. But yeah, the entire discussion on rethinking how taxes collected in Africa, when which sectors should be focused on, how the taxes should be used for development. I think we will have a more lengthy discussion on that, and especially the situation in Kenya. I'm not sure what it is like in other countries, but for instance, like medical care is so bad in Kenya that even if the government is one of the agenda items that they're trying to improve on, but to the extent that you find that there's a lot of community, call them in Kenya, we call them harambe. And what it is like is that you ask people to contribute towards medical bills so that you find at any given time there's a GoFundMe page in Kenya, like so many of them, someone asking for money to just meet their medical expenses. So, and you find that when someone is sending money to the GoFundMe page, you're being charged excise duty on the transfer money that you're paying to transfer the money to the GoFundMe page. At some point you just think the government should, at the very least, waive all fee or taxes that are levied when you're contributing to these causes where the government hasn't helped people with medical care or education. But I think that's a discussion that we could have a longer discussion in. I don't think there is any question that has been asked. So I will just say thank you, David, for the discussion. So if you could give your final thoughts on this topic, and yeah, and then Maxwell, you could as well give any final thoughts on the topic.
I think David could be on mute.
Okay. Okay, Maxwell, maybe go.
Yes, so I think this topic is a very good one, and one point or one thing that we have noted on this call is the fact that there is a need for our governments to take a broader look at the taxation of this informal sector, and particularly looking at the digital economy. We need to look at it not only from the local players, but also from the foreign or the non-resident players, how our laws could be drafted and crafted in such a way as to capture all these potential players. It is also been noted on this call the fact that governments, in as much as they are interested in raising revenue, should also find a balance between fulfilling what their core mandates are, providing the needed environment for businesses to thrive, providing infrastructure, the road network, the space for business to actually thrive, internet, accessibility, electricity, and water, so that businesses would be able to thrive. And once all this thing is done, our taxation could also be targeted at certain industries to be able to also provide them incentives so that they can be able to grow. And once those industries grow in the long run, they will be willing, or they will be able to contribute their quotas to the development of the nation. And finally, our governments should also be able to work on the issue about how they are perceived to be corrupt. Any instances of which actually comes to mind, or any issues that are reported on corruption, it is recommended that government take steps to address them, so that the citizens would have the confidence in them, and they know that when they are paying their taxes, it will be put into the right use. Yeah, thank you, Christine and Tim.
Christine, I believe that the overriding contribution here is that the government should not focus on making corruption happen. What the government needs to focus on is to jumpstart the economy, so that these social and basic amenities can be affordable, and businesses can thrive, so that paying tax.
Hi, Clifford, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Okay, great. So I was going to say in my closing remarks, how you frame your problem is going to be very important in the solution that you find, or that you will be seeking for. And so if we frame the problem in Africa as people are not paying enough taxes, then we will go after people and be trying to push them into the tax net. But if we frame our problem as a problem that we as Africa need to increase our gross domestic product, we need to be more productive. What you find is that in turn, this government revenue problem will end up being solved. If you collate Africa's GDP together, you find that it's not even greater than America's GDP, or it's not even greater than the GDP of Europe. So we have a very, very big productivity issue. And when we solve that, it will trickle down into government revenues.
Thank you very much, David, for that. So basically, I was trying to see if there are any questions that anyone could have posted giving our closing remarks. I can see, and so mine is basically just to thank Christine for putting together this forum, and equally being one of our panelists today. Thanking David Maxwell for the insightful input in today's discussion. So our next discussion, I believe, should be around the moral fabric around taxation of the informal sector. So I believe, Christine, you'll be in a position to circulate that with us in due course.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I would like to thank everyone for today's participation, and I think we can all live at our own convenience. And Christine, you could confirm that you could circulate the recording once we're done with the call.
Yes. We will. Thank you very much, Clifford, for this, and David, much appreciated, and Maxwell, much appreciated, and everyone who has listened in. And we will circulate the recording. We will put it on YouTube and circulate it on different social media platforms. And these discussions are always insightful, and in fact, we have taken up to putting them up as podcasts as well, and just sharing them across different podcast forums. So thank you very much for your thoughts and insights. They are very helpful. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching the discussion. If you like the discussions, please subscribe to our YouTube channel, like our videos, and follow us on social media on Facebook, Africa iShare platform, on Twitter, Africa iShare. Thank you.